The issue of safety, something that I want to make sure the American public understand. It's not only safety when you inject somebody and they get maybe an idiosyncratic reaction, they get a little allergic reaction, they get pain. There's safety associated. Does the vaccine make you worse? And there are diseases in which you vaccinate someone, they get infected with what you're trying to protect them with, and you actually enhance the infection. You can get a good feel for that in animal models. So that's going to be interspersed at the same time that we're testing. We're going to try and make sure we don't have enhancement. So the worst possible thing you could do is vaccinate somebody to prevent infection and actually make them worse. Not only are you looking to see if it works, but you're constantly keeping your eye on safety to make sure that a vaccine actually doesn't enhance disease and make people work.
But the vaccines for coronaviruses don't work that well in aged individuals. If you have a heterologous strain that differs by 1% to 2%, it can break through in some of these vaccines, especially in the elderly. And then you have a process called Th2 immune pathology, which basically means the vaccine primes the immune response to do bad things when you get exposed to the virus. And so the immune pathology is actually worse in a vaccinee. It's been described before with respiratory syncytial virus vaccines in the 60s, and that's why we still don't have a respiratory syncytial virus vaccine for children today. And there's evidence of enhancing antibodies, although this is more controversial. These are antibodies that don't neutralize, but they bind to the virus and allow it to infect cells it normally can't infect. Now, these are all problems with SARS. Remember, this is considerably different than SARS. They may be problems or they may not, but we have to look for sure. So that's one issue.
We partnered with a group at the New York Blood Center and the Galveston National Laboratory to take on the big scientific challenge of coronavirus vaccines. And I say a scientific challenge because one of the things that we're not hearing a lot about is the unique potential safety problem of coronavirus vaccines. This was first found in the early 1960s with the respiratory syncytial virus vaccines, and it was done here in Washington with the NIH and Children's National Medical Center, that some of those kids who got the vaccine actually did worse, and I believe there were 2 deaths in the consequence of that study. Because what happens with certain types of respiratory virus vaccines, you get immunized, and then when you get actually exposed to the virus, you get this kind of paradoxical immune enhancement phenomenon. And we don't entirely understand the basis of it, but we recognize that it's a real problem for certain respiratory virus vaccines. That killed the RSV program for decades. Now the Gates Foundation is taking it up again. But when we started developing coronavirus vaccines, and our colleagues, we noticed in laboratory animals that they started to show some of the same immune pathology that resembled what had happened 50 years earlier. So we said, oh my God, this is going to be problematic.
The ability of individuals who are infected through breakthrough infections, namely vaccinated people who ultimately get infected, that they are generally without symptoms or minimally symptomatic. However, it is clear that they are capable of transmitting the infection to uninfected individuals. And the data that they reported indicates that if you look at the level of virus in the nasopharynx of a person who's vaccinated and has a breakthrough infection, and compare that to the level of virus in the nasopharynx of an unvaccinated person who's infected, they're essentially equivalent, which would go along and underscore the fact that vaccinated people who do have a breakthrough infection are clearly capable of transmitting the infection to an uninfected person.
What you heard Fauci say is the nasal titers are the same in vaccine recipients and unvaccinated. That's selective disclosure, apparently. Nasal titers are a very poor indicator, as opposed to blood-based titers of infectious virus. What NBC News dropped yesterday was the statement sourced from an unnamed government official that the titers in the vaccinated are actually higher than in the unvaccinated. What does this mean? And why do you suddenly see this kind of frantic scramble? This is precisely what one would see if antibody-dependent enhancement was happening. What is antibody-dependent enhancement? Briefly, it's that the vaccine causes the virus to become more infectious than would happen in the absence of vaccination, would cause the virus to replicate at higher levels than in the absence of infection. This is the vaccinologist's worst nightmare. It happened with the respiratory syncytial virus and in the 60s and caused more child deaths in vaccine recipients than unvaccinated. It happened with Dengvaxia, the dengue vaccine. And it's happened with virtually every other coronavirus vaccine development program, certainly in humans, known in history. And it's what the vaccinologists like myself have been warning about since the outset, is the risk of antibody-dependent enhancement. And I don't mean to sound alarmist, but what it seems to be rolling out is the worst case scenario, where the vaccine in the waning phase is causing virus to replicate more efficiently than it would otherwise, which is what we call antibody-dependent enhancement. That's what the word is. And people have been warning about this since the outset of this rushed vaccine campaign.
We are seeing concerning evidence of waning vaccine effectiveness over time and against the Delta variant. Additionally, reports from our international colleagues, including Israel, suggest increased risk of severe disease amongst those vaccinated early. Given this body of evidence, we are concerned that the current strong protection against severe infection, hospitalization, and death could decrease in the months ahead.
But if it's easy enough to get titers in patients that have been vaccinated versus those that have not been vaccinated, that are infected with SARS-CoV-2, in this case, Delta variant, and if those data verify that the titers are higher in the blood with those that have been vaccinated compared to those that have not been vaccinated, that would be the smoking gun to demonstrate antibody-dependent enhancement of virus replication, and that would typically correlate with disease. So that's where we're at, is these preliminary signals being disclosed by unnamed government officials suggest that we're there in the worst case scenario that the vaccine community has been warning about since the beginning of the outbreak, because it's been the history of all other coronavirus vaccine development programs in humans and in most of the animals. So I don't know what else to say. This is another one of those. It looks like a duck. It walks like a duck. It quacks like a duck. It's probably a duck, but we got to prove it.